Hello, hello, hello. This is Kaolin from the Essence of Transformation, and this is episode 11. I'm going to start very quickly getting into it because this program is really about racism for many different reasons. And so far, I hope that you are learning a great deal from it. And I also hope that you are glad to be hearing many of the things you may already know that are reinforcing what you do already know. And I wanted to simply thank you for listening and to participating in this entire process. It is absolutely a challenge to deal with racism on a personal level, and I'm not implying that many of you are not doing that. I believe that many of you are doing that. And so I'm happy that this particular kind of work is appealing to you, that it is thought provoking, and then for many, it's actually even life changing. I think we all need to become more certain of what we're doing and what we believe in. I think we are all needing to be clearer and to use our voice. I am completely impressed and flabbergasted by all the protests going on in the world. It's absolutely inspiring. The incredible courage of everybody who is stepping up, stepping forward, and making their opinions and their politics very, very clear. I've been fortunate in my life as I've known people who do that and who have been doing it all of their life. I want to add that I'm a member of the National Organization for Women, and I want to thank Jocelyn Morris in particular for her incredible support of my work all these years. It has meant a great deal to me, and whatever I accomplish is the result of her extreme kindness and patience. So, what I'm going to do is start to do chapter 5, read chapter 5, and I may get to chapter 6, we'll see. But first I want to go to the definition of racism that I had created long ago, and this is a repeat because I had mentioned it in another episode. But given the general climate of the world and the country right now, I also thought to include it at the beginning of this particular show. So my definition of racism is on page 115 in the book, talking about race, a workbook about white people fostering racial equality in their lives. It's actually a book about all people, not simply white people. However, there was another book being put out the same day that mine was, that had my original title. And so it had to be changed last minute because it was actually at the printer. So that's a kind of interesting little part about your title of your work. And there's always surprises when you're getting published. You're always going to be experiencing surprises when you assert yourself about your politics. And that's part of what had happened with the title of my book. So here's my definition of racism. Racism is a systemic, psychological, and economic approach to life imposed upon the psyche of individuals from infancy onward. Its origins were created out of the myth that white people are superior to people of color. Through slavery and enforced labor, it has survived and will continue to survive as long as white privilege remains intact. It can be unlearned just as it had been learned. Racism relies upon ignorance in order to remain effective. It cannot bear to give up power. It loves money. It fears poverty and despises sobriety. Racism thrives on all addictions, and yet it loathes attachment. It is at once deeply personal, while it is wholly incapable of intimacy. And that's it. Now, you may have your own definition of racism, and in the book, I do give pages where you can fill in the details of your own opinion about racism, and you can be sure to kind of review what it actually means to you, what your own definition of it is. And what I have found for many people is that in the beginning, when they start to think what is really racism, and they put it into words, by the end of the book, you're going to have something else to say about it that might be quite different than the beginning of it. It's a process of development. I consider it a maturation process because it's conscious. It's not simply instinctual. It's not only reactive, but it's informed. It's informative. There have been many people in the last few decades who have a lot of resistance to discussing racism because it's too painful, or they're too ashamed to, or they're too angry to, or maybe too bitter to. And then others are simply resenting that it has remained a very serious problem in our culture for so long. My own opinion is that every president failed to make sure that reparations were given to people of color. And I think that was the biggest mistake in our culture. It is one that we're paying for right now. It simply wasn't a priority. There would not be enough approval for it. But I'm a little tired of the celebrity aspect of that position in this culture. And I'm very sorry that a lot of the presidents who had opportunities to deal with this subject didn't. And now they're regretting it, and now they're coming together to figure out what can they do. And to me, it's kind of absurd. But we'll see what happens. Who knows? And we're in no position to be too critical about anything that could happen that's favorable, that's a desired outcome of the terrible pains and suffering going on. So, in this book, chapter 5, I speak of a new identity. Racism doesn't give to us what I want without taking something away from somebody else, and that's the truth. And that was one of the students' quotes, that they had realized there's this constant, active, terrible aspect of privilege, because it is not simply something that's inherent or morally correct at all. Of course not. So therefore, this is why the students chose to participate in class. They were dissatisfied with that. They understood it was an imbalance of power, and they wanted to examine power more thoroughly and more consciously. So I start out to say, at the start of the course, just as you may have felt at the start of the book, my students feared that racism was just too big a topic to get involved in. And also that it was just too thorny a problem for them to handle, too unpleasant, too conflicted. But not far into it, they began to be aware of real change in themselves and in each other. As these quotes from their journals show, there is a new kind of an approach to themselves, to their choices, to their freedom of choice, and the problem of racism in their life. They didn't really want it to keep growing. They wanted to learn how to really deal with it. And so they came into class quite prepared to do that, and I always really admire that about them. I really continue to. One of them said, My position in this culture due to racism may be temporary because it is dependent upon racism in order to continue. Another said, the entitlement I was raised with has confused me about my self-worth. Another student had said, I have no idea how blacks, and I don't mean one homogenized group, interpret my behavior. It could be that it occupies less space in their mind than it does in mine. And can a white person survive without group dynamics validating their supremacy and protecting them? And here's another. The ironic thing is that the first day of class, I expected you, the teacher, to be black. When I thought of race, I saw only people of color before the class began. When I saw my dad's response to the fact that the teacher was white, I realized I do not think that was so weird anymore. I see white people as a part of race, at least the race problem. This is a big change in my thinking, and I am so happy I have changed about that now, that I see it differently now. The students had begun to cope with the subject and the introspection required of them. They clearly felt less apprehensive about talking about racism. Their commitment to doing the work was increasing, and they were motivated by a deep curiosity that I found inspiring. In race work, we want to change the conditions that have contributed to our ignorance and our privilege. The introspection we undergo as we review it all, and our histories and herstories, and reassess the role of racism plays in our lives, helps us come together, come to a greater understanding of ourselves. This understanding leads us to a transformation, deep change. When we change, we are more able to become a catalyst for change. And the best place to start is with the people closest to us. We all know at least one person who is a racist. If I asked you to, you could name one person who is a racist. From now on, you will begin to question their motives. You may even begin to question their intelligence or their humanity. These people are your sisters, your brothers and friends, your mothers, your fathers, and so many others who are closely involved in your life. They are there at all the key moments of your life, loving, proud, caring, and racist. How does their racism affect you? How do you feel now about your past reactions to their racism? How will you react tomorrow, next month, or in a decade? One of the students called Marie shared an experience that she went through with one of the racists in her life, who happened to be her father. And this is about Marie's prom. All through high school, Marie moved and had enjoyed a close relationship with her classmate David, who was African American. Neither of them had ever really been dating, and at the time of the senior prom, as it approached, they decided to go together. They were sure to have a good time, and they talked about the idea, and the more they did, they liked it. Marie's father, however, did not like it. He surprised Marie in forbidding her to go to the prom with David. Never before had her father taken much notice of her friendships or her friendship with David, It was a prom. It was a prom setting and the possibility of romance that brought out his anger toward Marie, and she was shocked to discover that her father really was a racist. 4 years later in class, Marie was still deeply troubled by her father's reaction and her own. She not only gave in to her father, but she failed to tell her friend David the truth. She was still afraid to tell him, worrying it might hurt him, she thought. Worrying about it might hurt him. It could really hurt him. So she protected him from knowing the truth. If she had it to do over again, she said, she would have not given in to her father. She cared for her father. Of course, she loved him. She did not want to hurt him. But she would have stood up to him. And if she'd been forced somehow to give in, she would certainly have told David what had happened. Secrecy and baggage. I responded to Marie's entry like this. You mentioned your friend and the invitation to his prom, and you said no, so you wouldn't have to deal with your dad. You also withheld the truth from your friend about why you could not go. You also feel sad about it. It has been a few years since this happened, and it is still bothering you. I'm going to be frank about how I see this, because it is such a prime example of some serious manipulations, which I attribute to the recurring love affair white people have with racism in general, and how it serves them. Of course, you can completely disagree with me, but I see a lot of secrecy and fear in this situation and the baggage we carry with us for life. It also interferes with our ability to resist racism. Why did you avoid your dad? It seems to me there are many reasons why you did not approach your dad with this invitation from your black male friend. It was not only because your dad is a jerk, as you put it, just as it is not simply because he is a racist, since racism is a compilation of layers of accumulated prejudices and judgments. Here are a few of the layers I read into this situation. I know Dad will give me flack, anger, rejection, or even some form of punishment. Will insult or dismiss me altogether, which will offend me and would make me feel like I am less than he is. If Dad acts out in a way that really pushes my buttons about my beliefs, I will then have to explain, defend, rebel, move away, or retaliate against them. If I am luckier or more privileged than my black friend, my dad knows that and must believe it is fine. And I know it even if I do not believe it is fine. I like being perceived as better, more innocent, and of more value. It reassures me I can get what I want out of life. It is all I have ever known. So why should I speak up and challenge it? If I do, I'm only hurting myself, right? The after effects of the prom. If Marie's father had control over the direction and the outcome of the friendship, then David's input was ineffectual from the start, isn't it? Wasn't it? Therein lies the danger of racism. It reinforces powerlessness, reducing the effect Marie's friend had in a relationship of his choosing. In a tragic way, he is not completely in the relationship of his he is not really in the relationship. Only a portion of him is, and it is that portion that Marie had control over because she was not being completely honest with him. He might think racism was not an issue. He might think he was perceived as a whole viable person in her eyes. And because nothing was said about her father interfering, he remained innocent. He remained unaware. He becomes invisible. If the situation were reversed, would Marie have preferred to be unaware of the real problem? Would you? The father's rejection of Marie's friend was due to the friend's skin color, plain and simple. And he expected her to honor his preferences, and by accepting his authority and power over her and her friend. This was authority and power over her and her friend. But there is more to it than that. If Marie rejected her friend and the relationship ended, would she then engage selectively in white-only relationships that wouldn't draw attention from her father? In order to regain some privacy, this might seem a worthwhile compromise. However, Marie would then be changing, she would then be choosing whiteness over blackness, and as a result, would probably expect less of herself and of others for the rest of her life. And this is where, in these issues, even though they start out when we're quite young, but many of them stay with us. When I went around and I did quite a few events, many people, many women especially, came up to me to talk to me about this particular relationship with maybe a male or even a female of color, and then that they resisted it and what they went through about it, and yet nothing was ever the same after all. And it's just more than a fantasy, and it's more than regret to me. It is that really internal, what would you call it, an internal awareness that some decision was the wrong decision, that some decision was based on something prematurely, that there is regret, that somehow or other the value of the other person, the person of color, got diminished. It got so diminished and then forbidden. That's a part of racism that has always kind of fascinated me, even when I was younger. And I'd think, how does that happen, though? How does someone who's important become another person's decision about their importance? And this is just a small sample. It certainly isn't the deepest. However, it's one that includes the dynamics that are most common in interracial relationships when they start to be challenged by somebody on the outside. And also, they needn't be romantic unions at all. It's anything, it's anybody, any kind of relationship. Now here, on page 87, is a workbook writing 5A. Number 1. What is your opinion of Marie's situation and choices? Number 2. Write one question, each for Marie, her friend David, and Marie's father. Try to come up with questions that help them grow together without anyone being a victim. By that I mean being excluded, being judged, being rejected. The nugget of racism Marie had a chance to examine and bring to the surface will require more attention from her and her father. It can alter their relationships to each other. Without that attention, this relationship is stuck in what could have been. In a way, her father's will enters into her future relationships because she kept his prejudice alive and unchallenged. The residue of unresolved tension may follow her wherever she may go. If Marie had told David what was going on, then her father's superiority could have been challenged by David and others. Marie may not have known that at the time, but her father probably did. Racism was and is one of the few ways he has to demonstrate control over her. Control reassures racists about their worth. The need for it and dependency upon it is one of the main roadblocks on the road to racial equality. More about that later, however, in the chapter. My comments to Marie continued. Since your father handed you this opposition consciously or unconsciously, after years of living with him, you and your dad now keep up your relationship at the expense of your self-respect and this young man's self-respect. How much do you respect your friend if you conceal such vital information from him for so long? The fact that it has continued to bother you may be an indication that you do respect him because you feel responsible and it is bugging you. But the respect is hidden under the layers of fear created by aligning yourself with your dad's racism. Racism always costs, however deeply it may be hidden underneath insecurities about one's self-worth and self-respect. It's tied up in your subconscious. It is tied up. It is part of your inheritance. Do you have what it takes to truly respect someone of another color when your father does not? Can you take the emphasis off of that person as a scapegoat for your own issues and your dad's as well? I also told her that I do not know the answers to those questions, but that she may be able to answer them for herself. Racial maturity. Confronting racism requires that we move beyond our adolescence. In race relations, we continually seem to fear the responsibilities and strains of adulthood. We need autonomy and maturity where these crucial matters are concerned. Where racism is concerned, we are too often like children, hoping changes will somehow or other get better, somehow or other take place, as if it is not up to us to learn the language or walk the walk that will dismantle inequality once and for all. But that is not the case today, and it will not be the case tomorrow. You will make the difference that will be made. The only hope we can experience is the hope you bring to others and to yourself. We have the answers to our questions. No one else does. We are responsible for what we already know. No one else is. If you decide to look for an apartment or buy a house, you set about finding the information you need. You read, surf the web, ask experts, talk to more experienced friends about how they found their apartment or a home. You may even take a class. Likewise, when you're looking for a job or planning to go to a school, you find out what you need to know. When we rely upon public assistance for any benefit, we find out what we need to know. Businesses who know racism exists at the workplace do nothing about it. But when they incur the slightest loss in their profits, you can be sure they call in an accountant, brainstorm among staff, and fix the problem. As a white person, I have noticed white people put more effort into knowing how to cook than in knowing how deeply impacted by racial injustice people are. I find this deeply, deeply disturbing. There is no lack of exposure to racial violence in our neighborhoods on TV, the internet, and radio. We have not been deprived of the history of civil rights. It is accessible to us. Racial equality requires personal growth. As mentioned earlier, our sense of hopelessness is an indicator that we must build our own racial equality muscle. Our children of all ages deserve to be enabled to feel hopeful about racial equality and to be spared the pains, the sorrow, the confusion, the grief of racism. Many of us know this already, yet we still struggle with it. We still give up and give in to racism. Prepare to be seen differently by your peers. People engaged in race work depart from what has been expected of them or hoped for by others in their lives. You will be considered rebellious or defiant, when in reality, you are simply becoming aware of yourself and what you do not want to be a part of. You find the assertion of your own values both exhilarating, liberating, and even promising. The new identity feels good. Some people, however, will see your involvement in other cultures as a rejection of your own. They realize you are preparing yourself. They believe you are putting yourself at risk when you integrate. They know that your life will involve danger because when you cross the color line, we enter a racial danger zone that was intended for people of color only, and yet you do cross. So in essence, what they're trying to do is protect you from their own ignorance and hatred and their own apathy about a problem in this culture that is violent. It's a violent problem. A new identity means letting go of some things. I refuse to give up parts of myself, wrote one student early in the class, and from another they said, there is so much I'd never give up. If we are no longer the designed winners, then we are losers. How can we be losers when we have already deemed people of color the loser? And yet racial equality means equal opportunity, so we certainly will incur some losses. Our assumptions of privilege and normalcy will be among the first things to go. We all know this. But we must let go of racism because it is our choice. It is up to us. In class, the students showed me that there were 3 pieces of knowledge about themselves that were key to their understanding whiteness and racism. One was, the changes we seek include bringing our own unresolved conflicts to the table, resolving and letting them go. Number 2, a change may come because we willingly dissolve our attachment to the values or traditions that got us here. And number 3, this change will take place due to the knowledge we gain of one another, going through a core and irreversible transformation. Now on page 91, there is a workbook writing 5H in the middle of this chapter 5. So I'm going to read that. It is necessary to surrender. Is it necessary to surrender your identity in order to support integration and racial equality? Number 2, have you ever feared someone because of his or her color? Number 3, have you been fearful of anyone because of your color? Number 4, what can you do about that fear today? Number 5, should a white person resent hearing about the race problem in America? Then we return to the chapter, to page 92. I have often wondered if we are too afraid to change, too eccentric to surrender, too cowardly to dissolve our narcissistic ways, or too vain to accept maturity and cooperation as a way of life, inclusive of all. Those are tough words for a tough problem. But in the student's writing, I came upon many a line that inferred these were also their concerns. The pain regarding values could not be overlooked. The concerns they had about losing are clear, and they wondered what kind of certainty or security would replace it? What would replace it? You're in a process of change. Often, when we're all in a process of change about anything important to us, we're not certain of the outcomes. There is no certainty about outcomes. Many of them are up to us in terms of how we assimilate the lessons and the perspective we choose to have about those lessons. When we lose, we want some assurance that the loss will be replaced with something of more value. But if we lose relationships because we want racial equality, they cannot be replaced. If we lose a job because of our desire for racial equality, we lose the job. We remain attached to our privilege and wonder how things can work out for us when we begin to let go of it. Wrote one student, I struggle to fill up my life by my own efforts with things, no matter the cost. This student was convinced that his struggle might be feeding racism. He was convinced he had gained his drive and his position independent of anyone else. But he did not. His accomplishment, his assertion of worth, independence, and competition existed on the foundation of white supremacy. His success had ensured another's defeat. We often feel the need to hold on to ideas, plans, guilt, inabilities, and even our conflicted identities about race. The students were stressed out, not hopeful. Again, the strains of fear, competition, and loss seemed to coincide with their confusion as they tried to figure out their relationship to racism. That may also be true of you. At this point in the book, the prospects for racial equality may seem rather poor. Who are you competing against right now? Is this competition feeding your desire for racial equality? Or does it diminish it? The new identity in the victim-oppressor pattern. The legacy of chattel slavery in the country casts a foreboding shroud across the descendants of enslaved people, as well as the descendants of enslavers. It also affects those who came to this country later to build their lives upon the foundation of wealth, which was dependent upon slavery. It is part of our identity, and we must dissect this legacy if we are to truly change. Unfortunately, part of the legacy is that when people of color hold white people accountable, when they are impatient or unfriendly, white people can simply drop the issue as if it had never surfaced. We can hide behind the defenses discussed in Chapter 3. Our role is mutable. Like actors, we have the power to mask our true position on racial equality. But the reality, whether we face it or not, is that the legacy of the slavery behind us has delayed our development. It has put us on hold. I am not sure how much we can know about ourselves without gaining more knowledge of slavery and the impact it still has on all of us today. That impact can perhaps best be seen in the roles of white people who tend to fail or fall into interacting with people of color, and then abandoning the situations. These roles mirror and keep alive the victim-oppressor pattern established during slavery. The issue of domestic abuse tends to attract a good deal of attention. People seem to care about it, and many feel free to analyze the psychodynamics between the abuser and the abused, but they seem less interested in the similar dynamic when it comes to racism and the impact slavery had and continues to have on our own psychology and actions. What happens next? Equality opens doors. After the abuse pattern is dissolved, there may remain such a residue of pain that the parties choose not to communicate with one another. But if communication is seen as an option, there are now more choices since both parties stand on equal ground. What might that communication look like? What do you want from me? The abuser, white people, asks of people of color. We want to be able to trust that people of color can accept the fact that we have changed. We also want to be assured that people of color will not hold us responsible for past offenses. That's a lot. We all carry baggage. That's a lot of baggage. That may not be possible. It will take time for us to crystallize our position and intent and the layers in the hopes and securing the most desirable outcomes from the admissions we must make of any wrongdoing. Then maybe they will choose to go through the process of recognition and acceptance of our needs, but maybe they will not. There is loss in forgiveness that they may not care to experience. There is a surrender of anger and resentment when one forgives. We have no control over the outcome of our efforts. It will be up to people of color to decide what they may want from us, if they want anything at all. We feel our way through and into a new identity. Because white people are in the dominant position, we can delay asking for forgiveness. We can postpone exhibiting in word and deed and desire, our desire for equality. But when we are done with delay and postponement, a very truthful, very fruitful process can begin. This process involves recognition of the oppressive role we have perpetuated, efforts at reconciliation and acceptance of the importance of feeling, for it is only through emotional work that a new identity can be achieved. It is not going to be possible to simply think our way out of it. Logical conclusions will not be very important. We have been hiding behind logic so much, and it has almost really deadened us. It has not helped. It is simply not enough. About not getting discouraged, you are beginning to realize why the very foundation of your soul can seem to crumble beneath your feet when you speak to another white person about racism and white privilege. Now you know why in a racial situation, when racism is not even considered a basis for a problem, you will be extremely discouraged, maybe even confused. You may freeze. You do not pause, you freeze. And by now you have felt that very painful descent into the abyss of caring about racism. Now You understand what happens to white people when they come to recognize racism, because you have come to recognize racism and will continue to. But this time, you will see now and why you do, and that there is more to it all than you had ever imagined, and that acknowledging that it exists or claiming to care about it is important. It is like walking through one door and finding another open, and then another, and then another. These are open doors to a new identity. From the new identity, you see the advantages of caring about this problem and the changes that will come because you do care. As we have said, fears, doubts, and delays are not left behind, nor is discouragement. In fact, it's natural to become discouraged along the way. Some causes for discouragement are the people in our history books are our relatives. We have to question the true motives of our ancestors without actually knowing them. We have to question the silence of our immediate families about, for example, the civil rights movement. Plus, real change takes forever. White people tend to give up on each other too easily when the issue is race. We let each other off the hook because the result of our queries and the analysis necessary to make any progress at all requires change, and we know that it does. So it takes strength to resist shutting down when this exploration becomes difficult. We are all in a box of oppression, but not for the same reasons, and never with the same outcome as people of color. It's almost easy to become discouraged because there is no happy ending to work for or look forward to. There is no immediate gratification, but there is an ongoing satisfaction that we have tackled a problem many don't want any part of. There is also an obligation to disassemble the mechanism that keeps us more neutral than we may want to be on the subject. In the next chapter, you will see how a young man named Roger wrestled with his white privilege and began to walk the walk that called for change through self-awareness. On page 96, if you woke up this morning and there had been no racism in your life, how would your life have been different? What would you recommend to help heal the problems we have mentioned in this book? Whose help would you need in order to start working on the racial equality muscle in your own life? What organization would you call up today to become more racially integrated in your own community? And what does white privilege mean to you right now? And that is chapter 5. I am intentionally not going to move on to chapter 6 right now. I'm going to do that for episode 11. And I wanted to mention that I also have the study guide for this book, which is a very helpful tool. I had mentioned it in one of the earlier episodes, and it is truly a very helpful tool if you're going to be engaging in group dynamics with people, perhaps in a classroom, perhaps as just a group of people who are really just interested in figuring out this problem and how to deal with it. And I also wanted to add that that is available along with the book on Amazon and other retail marketers and indie bookstores. I think the times are exasperating. One of the most obvious changes in the culture right now is the awareness of extreme divisiveness, the awareness of rage, the awareness of the need for control, the awareness that a lot of the work that had invested in diversity and in inclusion has been halted and also has been tried to be stripped away. And of course, there are many people who are doing a great deal about that and working very hard to be sure that this will get worked out in our culture. And the strains of the work are absolutely horrifying, but they've always been. They've always been. However, when you start to work on it yourself independently of other situations, when you no longer accept being discouraged or being unaware, then you can gradually start to develop a stronger sense of your identity, a stronger resolve to tackle this particular problem in your life. I've seen people go on marches who are totally racist, but they're at that racist march for a variety of other reasons. I have also seen people express a real desire for racial harmony and who are absolutely not advancing that particular perspective unless they're the center of attention in some way in which they're actually rejecting other people and their efforts on this work. It's a complex area. It's a very complex area. One thing that I am very surprised by right now is the severity of racism in the country, which now is so out there that no one can say that they don't know about racism anymore. No one can do that. I had written my book. I taught the class in 94 and 95. And then I wrote the book and got it published in 2020. Now, chapter 6 is going to be the next chapter that I'm going to be reading for episode 11. And it will be out following the week after this one is. And this is about Roger and William. William is an African American now, and Roger is white, and they're friends, and they're driving, and they get picked up by a cop because William was the driver. There was nothing wrong with the car. They weren't speeding, not drunk, whatever. Just going somewhere. And this chapter deals with what Roger went through. Also William, but Roger, especially because this is his first time as a white person to actually be in a situation that was clearly racist and also petrifying. So that's an important subject. And we also discuss how it changes their relationship, because once you are a white person in an interracial relationship and you experience racism and you see your friend of color or partner of color, what you see you see them being threatened for nothing, and you see the freeze that they're going through, and you also see the fear. And when you see that, it's very, very painful, and you both don't really know. Roger's not sure what to do because there's nothing really for him to do but be cool and be quiet. And William's quiet because he's very aware of what's going on. It's happened before. But I call that the involuntary transition in the interracial friendship. And many relationships don't survive that because it makes the relationship possibly heavier than it would have been otherwise. They may barely know each other. Or they may be very good friends, and it's the first time that they happen to go out for a ride somewhere. That happens. In any event, all of a sudden racism becomes deeply personal. And it's not something Roger's hearing about. It's something he's experiencing. And he's considered by the white cop. He's sort of given that look of a warning. You better be complicit in my racism. Don't stick up for this guy, I'm not finished yet. So the dynamics really change radically. And in that chapter, we deal with that. I'm going to close now and thank you very much for your time. There's also a 7th chapter, which I'll be talking about in episode 13. Excuse me. And thank you very much for listening. And we're going to keep working through this problem together. Take very good care of yourself and one another. Thank you.